Hello, my name is Gil Peralosa, and this is the bi-weekly webinar, Cities for Everyone. Today, I am very happy hosting it from the offices of the world-renowned architect, Norman Foster, as he has invited me to be one of the academic chairs and lecturer at his amazing program on sustainable cities. Originally, I'm from Bogota, Colombia, where I led the construction of hundreds of parks, in addition of taking a small open street program, Ciclovia, to the world's largest pop-up park. Now I live in Toronto, Canada, where 18 years ago, I created the nonprofit 880 Cities, and later on, Cities for Everyone. Today's guest is Professor Jason Corburn from UC Berkeley. It's very interesting because he's both professor of city and regional planning and of public health, two areas that should be interwoven. They should be sitting at the table very often on creating cities. Jason, thank you very much. We're all eager to learn on these most important topics, how to create cities for life, where we can end the urban gun violence epidemic. Thank you. Jason, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thanks, Gil. Wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, everybody. Jason is going to tell us a little bit about himself, and he's going to do a presentation. He's an amazing person. I've known him for some years, and he deals with these both issues. Very few people. Some people are into public health, others into regional and local planning, but very few are combined both. Jason, please, everybody's here from all over the world. They want to hear about your knowledge and experience. And then remember, people, we close the chat during the presentation. As soon as the presentation is over, then we open the chat again. But the Q&A is open so that everyone will be focusing on what Jason is telling us and not on the comments. Thanks a lot, Jason, for having accepted the invitation. Please feel free to share the screen. Okay. Great.
Okay, we're good. Okay, great. Thanks, Gil. Again, thanks, everybody. Glad to see people from all over. I'm going to be talking mostly about work that I've been doing in California and the San Francisco Bay Area, and I saw some local folks, so I'm excited to engage in conversation. But I think this work is definitely global, and it reaches many, many places around the world, and it's a concern, I think, for many folks. Just a little bit more about myself. As Gil said, I'm a professor at UC Berkeley in both public health and city and regional planning. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is in a book that came out a couple of years ago called Cities for Life, where the case studies, the work I'm going to talk about in Richmond, California, also connections to some of the global work, although I'm not going to talk too much about that, in places like Medellin and in Nairobi. So if you're interested, more is there. We can talk more about that. And also more detail on some of the research, detailed research findings, our practice implications is up on my personal website and our center at UC Berkeley called the Center for Global Healthy Cities. That website is actually currently right now down. Unfortunately, we'll be back up in about a week or so. So really, I think much of the work, Gil, that you've done in your career, amazing work, and things that I've tried to engage in from both academic and practice, just doesn't work if we have violence in our communities. And particularly, somewhat of a unique American, US problem, but also in many other cities, particularly Latin America, South Africa, increasingly in Europe, a gun violence issue, a gun violence challenge in our communities. That the fear of violence, people avoid public space. There is no opportunity to heal from that green space and enjoy those streets and parks and ciclovia and all that wonderful stuff. Gun violence, of course, is also a public health issue, a critical issue. Of course, it literally kills too many. But also results in anxiety, fear, stress, the kinds of things that impact everything from our sleep to hypertension to this chronic stress, what we also call toxic stress in public health. And really the fundamental building blocks of health and well-being in our cities the work that I know many people on this call and this whole seminar is really all about is social connection. How do we create and support communities that bring people together? That connection, that social connection, those friends, those families, those public activities, though, that's the building blocks for health. But when we're living in fear, when there's violence in our communities, that breaks down. And our response, traditionally, particularly in the US and many cases in Latin America, has been a harsh policing, militarized incarceration response. And not only has this resulted in vast racial inequalities and racist institutions, but left a legacy of kind of dehumanization and lack of investment, community investment in the places that need it the most. And I'm going to be talking about a strategy called Advanced Peace, which is really a global strategy now that emerged here in the Bay Area, Richmond, California. And it's really a strategy about urban healing and peace building and peacekeeping. And I'm going to talk about this connection to public health using this term neurourbanism, which is really about how we as urban planners can shape both social supports and services, as well as our built environments and our places to really help folks heal, and both individuals and communities that have been experiencing chronic trauma. And much of that trauma is not just at the individual level, but it's a result of the legacy of our planning and policy institutions. And what I talk about, a lot of folks talk about, is how planning can result in structural violence. So I'm going to talk more about the interpersonal, but often the root causes of those interpersonal violence is structural. It's in our institutions, our policies, our practices. Of course, one example in the United States, this legacy of redlining. This is a redlining map on the right-hand side. And that was a federal government policy instituted at the local level that rated some communities as red, which were risky investments, thus the redlining term. And that it signaled to banks and others to not give loans, mortgages, and the classification of a red area, a D rating by the federal U.S. government, was primarily based on race and ethnicity, who was living there. Some other things in terms of the age and the quality of the built environment, but much of that was due to racist and discriminatory practices. So this resulted really in the spatial inequalities and spatial suffering that we see, and the sort of similar parallels in other countries about racial segregation. And that legacy of redlining and other similar kinds of planning policies results in what I and many others call this kind of slow violence, this everyday violence that often manifests, hopefully not too often, but does it frequently in things like gun violence, the lack of resources, the existing health issues, the lack of economic opportunity, food insecurity, fewer parks and trees. All of these things have been linked back to this history of redlining and racial spatial segregation, and also have been connected with greater firearm violence in these same places. This is just another example. Here's Fresno, California, a city kind of in the central part of the state, which also this gun violence program that I'm going to be talking about is located. And you can see the lower left, Southwest Fresno, the red line area. And this is the last, this is gun violence incidents in Fresno since 2015 on the map on the right. So an association. Again, it's not causality, but it's a strong association. And what I call this too is urban malpractice. And this is obviously Brazil, Sao Paulo, but these are conscious decisions or lack of decisions really that planners and policymakers have made to not invest in the favela on the left, but also the interests of those living on the right-hand side in the high-rise buildings, their pools and their play spaces and their homes are cleaned and maintained by the urban poor living on the left. So there's an interest often at play here to keep conditions the way they are, including some of the violence that we see in U.S. cities. Now, thankfully, the last year or two in the United States, we've seen a decrease in urban gun violence. And I'm happy to talk about why. And many of us in this space are talking about why during the pandemic, we saw this big spike, much of it probably due to a lot of the disconnection that was created through the policies around COVID-19, and some of the reconnection that's been possible in 2022 and 23, we think is leading to this decline in gun violence. So there's some good news, but from 2015 to 2021, firearm deaths accounted for 4.5 million years of life lost before the age of 65. And this is more than diabetes, stroke, liver disease, and COVID-19 combined, which is just an incredible statistic from the Centers for Disease Control. And of course, this is not impacted by everyone. Many can avoid the urban gun violence that we see, particularly in the United States. It's a very, very much racialized epidemic. Young African-American men, often under the age of 35, are the most victimized by gun violence. And this is a trend that we've seen 25, 30 or more years. This is something which is why we call it an epidemic. We have not gotten at the sources and have not intervened in a way to disrupt this trend that I'm showing here. The top line is the black men under 30, between 15 and 34 years old. And then you can see the lines at the bottom. The trends are pretty much stable for almost every other racial or ethnic group in the United States. Again, that's CDC data. And if we look across the world, we see also disproportionate burdens of violence. Women, people of color, indigenous folks, Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Colombians, most impacted by gun violence. And on the left, you're seeing data from Brazil of the teen gun deaths since 2001 to 2018, and activists in Cali, Colombia, focusing on the disproportionate racial and ethnic burdens of violence. And this has not gone ignored by scientists, researchers across different fields. It's just that we aren't often speaking to each other and using each other's knowledge in partnership with communities to solve things. This is a report from the US National Academy of Sciences and Medicine, started in 2000, so almost 25 years ago, and had an update in 2010, which basically said, you know, our neighborhoods can influence our brains, our neurons. And this is the idea of the neurourbanism strategy that many folks have been focused on. That the experiences we have in our places and the relationships or lack thereof can really influence our brain architecture, our decision-making, our stress levels, and that release of stress hormones that can damage our brains and our bodies over time. And that's what we call toxic stress. And this is the idea that, you know, stress is positive. You know, I'm nervous for this presentation. That's positive stress because I have resources or I practice or I have ability to manage that stress. But when it's out of your control, things in your community, chronic, even from in utero through being a young person through aging, things you can't turn off. You don't have resources to address that trauma. It becomes toxic to your body and your brain and contributes to many of these health outcomes that we see are the leading causes of disability and morbidity and ultimately mortality, not just in the United States, but globally. So unaddressed trauma is really often at the source of both the violence we're seeing in communities and the lack of kind of healing-based solutions. And it's not just based on individual experiences, but also our places, our communities. And the good news is that we can change this toxic stress. We can change even our brain architecture. This is Marian Diamond, who is a world-renowned scientist here at UC Berkeley. She passed away, but in her 90s a few years ago. She really pushed the idea of neuroplasticity, which you may have heard of. She was actually very well known for diagnosing Einstein's brain. But she would give lecture after lecture, and this is an image of her giving a lecture at UC Berkeley on how we can alter our brain through fundamental, what she called environmental and social interventions. She wrote many books on parenting and how to really rewire children's brains in a positive way through things like places to exercise and positive, healthy foods. And fundamentally, he said that the fundamental thing we need to change our brains, to rewire our brains in a positive way, is that very technical term, love. And that connection, that social interpersonal connection, positive social supports and enriching social environments, physical environments can rewire our brains in positive, healthy ways. So we took these insights to Richmond where Richmond, California, and the San Francisco Bay Area, and I saw there's a bunch of folks from California and the Bay Area. So happy to talk more about the ongoing work in Richmond. And I'm going to fast forward through 15 or more years of work. But when we started in the early 2000s, Richmond was known as one of the most sort of toxic communities in terms of air pollution from a petrochemical refinery, lots of gun violence. The city was on the verge of bringing in the National Guard, the military, to address the gun violence issue in the community. This is a map showing it had the lowest life expectancy, Richmond, in the San Francisco Bay Area in 2005. Richmond also is a very rich city in terms of its legacy of immigration and industrialization and activism. And we tried to build on that. And when I say we, there were community-based organizations. There was the city of Richmond really trying to change, and in a partnership with UC Berkeley, myself and some colleagues at UC Berkeley. And we asked a set of fundamental questions. How do we transform this city collaboratively, not through research or even one intervention, but starting with the knowledge of community members, eliminate those drivers of toxic stress, and promote this healthy neurourbanism that I'm suggesting can happen through changes in social relations and our places. So we started with community agenda setting. Community members asked, what are your stressors? And we did these kinds of exercises with communities in neighborhoods across Richmond, particularly one neighborhood called the Iron Triangle. And what the city came up with over time was to bring health and public health into its urban planning strategies, starting with the California state law of a general plan, which is the roadmap for its city. Richmond became the first city in California to have a health and wellness element or chapter in its general plan, which said, hey, we want to promote health. We want to promote health equity through our land use and community strategies. That gave rise to something called the Richmond Health Equity Partnership, which I facilitated, where we brought together other partners, community partners, a county health and the school department, and many others that weren't participating in land use planning. And we came up with, again, inspired by the state of California and global World Health Organization conversations around something called health in all policies, which became an ordinance or a local law, which said every city agency has to promote health equity in its everyday work and in its budget. And it's going to be held accountable to that. And that's Richmond's health in all policies strategy. Again, one of the first cities in the United States to adopt that. And this was ongoing work. Let me give you a few highlights of the work that's been inspired by that. So the first is Richmond became one of the first communities in the United States to create an Office of Peacekeeping and Peacemaking in city government called the Office of Neighborhood Safety. Devon Bogan, Sam Vaughn, and others founded and lead this organization, and it's still in existence today. And the idea was that instead of bringing in the National Guard, could community members, in fact, formerly incarcerated community members who are coming home and coming out of prison, be leaders in helping to prevent violence in the streets and mentor and help heal the folks who are at the center of gun violence in Richmond. We've done some research to identify the stressors, that toxic stress, those traumas that many of the young people who are involved in gun violence, at the center of gun violence in Richmond, have experienced. Over 62%, or about 62%, experience 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. These are well-known, documented traumas that happen early in life that can influence decision-making as a teenager and your health as you age. And almost 50% of those folks in Richmond at the center of gun violence have experienced a gun violence exposure. So in other words, the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, don't ask about gun violence exposures. Have you ever been shot or arrested or frequently hear gunshots in your community? So what we're documenting here is the kind of existing traumas, unaddressed trauma and stressors that those at the center of gun violence in Richmond are often experiencing. The Office of Neighborhood Safety in Richmond really launched something called the Peacemaker Fellowship, which is part of this organization now called Advance Peace, which has a whole host of daily engagement strategies and opportunities for those at the center of gun violence. It's not connected to law enforcement, but it is in city government and provides a one-on-one or group mentor from these what we call credible messengers. These are folks who come back to Richmond, come back to their respective community after having spent time often in prison and gone through their own healing processes, and use that experience to help mentor young people and give them opportunities to avoid gun violence in their own community. So it's not one strategy. It's not just mentorship, and it's not just group healing or restorative justice circles. It includes that, but it also includes some things that are quite different and radical in some cases and controversial, like offering rivals from rival gangs opportunities to travel out of town together, to go to Disney World, to go out of state, to go even on international travel. And it also requires folks in the community with their mentor to develop a life plan, what they call a life management action plan. And as they make progress on this plan, they get economic rewards, a milestone allowance, they call it, to keep on track. As we would give our own grad students a fellowship to keep on track with their studies, we do the same thing. The ONS and Advanced Peace does the same thing in community violence intervention. This is what some of the work looks like with the outreach workers, really shifting that question in public health from what's wrong with you to, hey, what's happened to you? How do we understand those traumas, and how do we get at the healing needs that you may need as a young person that you're not getting in school, you're not getting in any social service? This is an outreach worker engaging with some of their young people. Also, there's group work, so it's not just one-on-one. And eventually the groups bring together rivals to do conflict mediation and discuss what is often driving the conflict. These are some, we do the research, the geeky side of the part of the intervention, where we look at, these are what they call the Peacemaker Fellows. These are the young people who are part of the program in Richmond and other cities. And you can see these numbers really reflect the intensity of the engagement that this program delivers to each one of these people. 35 people doesn't seem like a lot for a city of 110 or 20,000 people of Richmond, California. But the reality is that most urban gun violence in Richmond, but in Chicago, Baltimore, across the world, is really driven by just a few people, tens, hundreds of people. So it's a tractable problem. It's something we can get our hands on. We can identify often who those people are. In fact, often law enforcement knows who they are. But in this program, we go outreach to them. They're reluctant to join, but they sort of almost literally wrap their arms around them and provide these opportunities for them to address their traumas, these services, and give them both the individual and group opportunities, eventually things like job readiness and life skills. And this is some of the outcomes we're seeing: self-reported, better anger management, feeling safer in their community, improved mental health, not using guns. And one of the things we're doing is also recognizing that these street outreach workers through the Office of Neighborhood Safety and the Peacemaker Fellowship interrupt conflicts that don't show up on any police data. They won't show up in the media because they're conflicts that don't happen. They happen in the middle of the night or on a street corner where no one really sees it. But our outreach workers document that. We call those cyclical and retaliatory gun violence interruptions. I didn't make that up. Advanced Peace made that term up. And what we're showing here is that of the 105 of those, these are conflicts that could have resulted in a shooting or a murder or a gun homicide. Each one of those has a cost to it, an economic cost to the city, the county, the state of California, in terms of the police response, the healthcare response, the social cost to that family and community. And these are the estimated dollar figures for each one of those shootings with an injury or a gun homicide, up to $2.5 almost $1 million per gun homicide. So by interrupting that gun violence, not having that shooting happen, the Office of Neighborhood Safety, the Advanced Peace Peacemaker Fellowship is saving tens or almost hundreds of millions of dollars for cities and counties by doing this violence interruption. And that resource needs to be reinvested into these communities for services, parks, education, job programs, and the like. This is what we see in Richmond since that program was founded. You see this steep, sharp decline in both gun homicides and non-fatal injury shootings. In fact, 2023, Richmond had its fewest gun homicides in over 40 years, and almost 30 years, its lowest number of non-fatal shootings. Richmond really is, in many ways, showing a path forward for many, many cities. And that's what's happened. The Advanced Peace program is one that's sort of grew out of this experience in Richmond and is now across the United States, many cities here in the San Francisco Bay Area and California, but also Orlando, Florida, Rochester, New York. We're just starting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, many other cities interested in adopting this program. And here's just some gun violence data. The highlighted yellow ones at the bottom are the advanced peace cities, in addition to Richmond. We can see that reduction. There was reduction in some other cities, but many other cities don't have what this is called a community violence intervention program. What's important to recognize also about Richmond is it didn't stop there. That was critical. But that peacemaking and peacekeeping by the Office of Neighborhood Safety allowed community members, in fact, a community member who was part of that program in the Iron Triangle said, hey, I want to retake my community and improve not just safety, but also the built environment. And he lived in the Iron Triangle. His name is Brandon Harris, around a park called Elm Play Lot, which was abandoned and by the city, really, and taken over by dealers and violence. And young people and residents in the Iron Triangle came together as the community began to become more peaceful and said, we're going to take back this park. This is an image of the Iron Triangle neighborhood, got its name, but surrounded at one point by 3 sets of railroad tracks, giving to the sort of the legacy, the industrial legacy of Richmond. This is sort of what the fabric of the community looks like. This is that small park, really small neighborhood park. And what they tried to do was take back the park and claim it for themselves, work with the city to say, we want to redesign this place, but we're not going to just come up with a design and give it over to the architects and planners. We want to build it ourselves. And they formed an organization called Pogo Park, which is still in existence today. It's amazing work that they're doing. They took back this park and created a pop-up park because they had no money. So they sort of built it, changed a little bit, and kept people there day and night to keep it safe from the community who worked there. They eventually came up with a vision, an incredible vision for a new park to really re-stimulate life and investment in the Iron Triangle. And what was really unique was, instead of just, again, designing it and letting the city build it, they said, no, we want to build it. They worked with local artists and local industries to train residents in doing the construction of the park, building the benches, doing the landscaping, welding the play equipment. Again, equipment and a design that was really from the community, not from designers and architects. And this is what that amazing space looks like today, called Elm Play Lot, in the center of the Iron Triangle in Richmond. It wasn't enough, right? Peacemaking was also about taking back the streets. And so they're using that pop-up, low-cost planning strategy that I know Gil is very familiar with. Community members reclaim their streets by doing things like this, just putting cones and wood blocks and repainting the street in ways that it felt safer for young people. Again, instead of waiting for the police to arrive to calm the traffic, they acted as crossing guards and people on street corners where there was danger and young people weren't feeling safe. Again, this was all pop-up. And eventually, they worked with the city of Richmond to get a $35 million grant from the state of California to institute this and build this out permanently to reclaim the streets. And the final example is a connection to the Richmond Greenway, which is a linear park that connects the region, the San Francisco Bay Area, Berkeley, and all around. And Richmond was disconnected. And this Greenway was a former railroad track and turned into a linear park, but really not programmed by the community and not serving the community. Again, a community real planning process. What do we want this to look like? Well, we want safe places to play, but we also want economic opportunities. We want a community center. We want bathrooms. We want places where we can sell things. This is the design the community came up with. And I'm just circling. It's a really incredible, amazing design. It's under construction today, but this community center, this community hall, which is now what they call a community resilience center. That blue image in the background there is where the community center was planned to be designed. And again, this was the pop-up idea where the community built temporary play equipment and just got a sense of how did it feel and look, and how did young people or other community members use it in a temporary way before they went and did the final design. And they did the same thing with this community center, this community hall. They got some 2x4s at Home Depot and built it to scale temporarily to see what it would feel like. Where should the windows go? Where are the doors going to be? Where could the community kitchen be located? And then got our architects to build this model. This is the model of the what they call the Harbor 8 Park along the Greenway. It's at the intersection of Harbor Way and 8th Street, which is the name. And you can see on the back of the left image this community center, this community resilience center they call that it's now called. And this is just some of the progression of that construction from a blank slate to early construction to what it looked like a few days ago. It's still ongoing, and it's still an ongoing construction. And just to wrap up, what we've done at UC Berkeley is to try to say, hey, what's the impact of this work on well-being, stress, trauma, community connection? So we were lucky to have an opportunity to do a survey in 2009, before much of this work started, and 2019, before the pandemic, going door to door, community members trained to survey, asking questions about, do you feel safe? Do you use your park? Would you let your kids play here? How would you self-rate your well-being, your economic status, your housing stability? A bunch of questions like that. This is just a subset of some of our findings. I'm sorry to throw so many numbers and data up here. But really what I want to emphasize is the change over time of responses that we heard from folks around in the Iron Triangle. Again, previously one of the most violent, most challenged, underinvested communities in the San Francisco Bay Area, but for sure in Richmond. We also asked these same questions of folks outside of the Iron Triangle neighborhood, but within Richmond. And we saw these statistically significant changes after these community investments and this peacekeeping process had happened. People have stronger friendships and associations with their neighbors, asking their neighbors for help and advice, borrowing things, trusting their neighbors, not feeling unsafe about crime to go out and have their children play, and improvements in self-rated mental health and physical distress, physical health. So we do believe this work is having a significant impact in reducing stressors, improving well-being in this community. It's also improving economic status. This is some census data of showing a almost $15,000 increase in median household income, from 2009 to 2019 U.S. Census data. And importantly, we've seen this is data from the zip codes, the spatial areas in the Iron Triangle, and some in Richmond and in the Bay Area, Berkeley, and other areas. The bottom line there, the light blue, starts in 2010 at about 73 years of life expectancy for those in the Iron Triangle. And in about a decade, we've seen a 5-year improvement to almost a 77.9 as the average life expectancy. And we're confident that a lot of this, and this is the steepest change we've seen in almost any zip code in the East Bay area, is due to both this incredible work of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and these community investments that Pogo Park and the city of Richmond have made. This is just also a narrative. I had one of my PhD students do his dissertation on this work and did a photo voice, a community narrative capturing process with young people who, grew up as this process was happening. And this is one image and the narration from a teenager in Richmond in the Iron Triangle, looking at a part of that Elm Play Lot, that Pogo Park project. He's pointing to a creek in the back. You can't see it. It's sort of in the back left of the image, but it symbolizes for him peacefulness. And it shows that there's a place in this community just to sit down, chill, and take a breath. This is important to me because everyone needs a space to just sit and think or to relax in peacefulness. Even if it's not being used, it's good to know it's there. This is like this because the Pogo Park team was thinking of others that might be stressed or would just need a spot to relax. If I was in charge, I would make more spaces like this for people to relax in with more shade. So it's really a lovely reflection by this young person about their community, about how they see themselves and their community in new ways that didn't exist, we feel like, when we started this work. So it's really about creating these positive community experiences, community environments, reducing those community stressors through the healing of engaging both people and place. And that's what we've been doing in Richmond and in many other cities with a similar strategy. The Advanced Peace Program, like I said, is really at the heart of this gun violence reduction, and organizations like Pogo Park and the city of Richmond really taking that peaceful environment and now investing in places. So we can do this. We need a commitment to end the urban gun violence epidemic. It starts by centering those who are at the or engaging those who are at the center of gun violence as leaders, not just participants, but really leaders in co-creating solutions and implementing them, getting paid to implement them. Those returning folks, those formerly incarcerated folks who are returning to their community to be mentors, community members designing and building and maintaining the public spaces, the community spaces in their neighborhoods. Everyday positive engagement, that mentorship is really what we feel is at the heart of a new needed neuro-urbanism, informed by this idea of toxic stress and an understanding of the kinds of supports people need to heal from trauma, and entire communities need to heal from that structural violence and trauma. It also is important that we reorient the face of the state, meaning government, local government in particular, planners, municipal officials. In many cities, the only experience young people and community members have, particularly those living in gun violent communities, is with policing. And it's a violent, often response, enforcing or incarceration folks, rather than seeing the state as a partner, an ally. Think of these peacekeepers of the Office of Neighborhood Safety. These are local government workers, and they're part of the city, and they give a very different face to the role that local government can play. We're also, as we've shown, I think, saving lots and lots of valuable resources that ought to be reinvested, a sort of restorative justice reinvestment, reparations reinvestment in communities with the savings from reducing gun violence. So peacemaking and keeping is essential for the sustainable, joyful, healthy communities that, Gil, you've been talking about here through these wonderful seminars and inclusive community development. And what we've shown here is a process of a decade plus in making, but I think there's lots of lessons to share for cities and folks around the US and around the world. I'll stop there. Thanks.
The last question always to our guests is, you have people from all over the world, from big cities, from small ones, people, and the goal of this webinar series is to develop passionate advocates. This is not just an academic. We want people to do something. What is your call to action? How can people, how can we contribute in this topic? How do you see that is not technology, it is people, is more the what, is the quicker, cheaper, faster, is the pain, so what would be your call to action to end? And I truly appreciate, Jason, that you accepted this invitation. It has been a wonderful presentation. We'll have the recording in 2 days so that people can share it with elected officials, with advocates, with people all over. So, Jason, your final call to action to everyone connected.
Yeah, final call in 10 seconds or less, right? I mean, I'm an academic,
No, it can be 1 minute or 2 minutes, no worries.
Yeah, well, no, for sure, trauma has been too regularized, and we've seen it as a biomedical, a treatment problem rather than a community and a healing problem, a challenge to change our experiences rather than just treat it afterwards. It's necessary but insufficient. I would say the call to action, as I've said, I think a couple of times here, is, how do we lead with love? How do we lead with seeing the humanity in our different communities, no matter whether we're part of that community or not, or part of that culture or that identity group, see their humanity. And through that humanity, meaning listen, carry with humility, and try to work collaboratively for these solutions. I think leading with love, as I mentioned, I think it was Martin Luther King Jr., justice is love in public policy, or something like that. And so I think I may have butchered that quote, but you get the point that we've got to really think not just about the science and the technology and the analyses and the beautiful design, but how do we put this compassion and humanity and love back into our planning processes and our public policies.
Jason, thank you very much. And Thank you, everybody who attended. Please fill out the surveys at the end, and don't forget to register and connect 2 weeks from today with Dr. Nadina Gale when we are going to be talking about nature and cities. Jason, thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Gil. Bye-bye.
Jason, thank you very, very much. What a fascinating presentation on a very complicated topic, on cities for life, on how can cities end the urban gun violence epidemic. You provided many examples from different types of cities, small and large, in the US and in other places. And the key message is really applicable everywhere. And the impact that love and compassion can take in all of this, and the issues of loneliness and the sense of belonging. Thank you very much. I hope that everyone that watches this video will share it with decision makers, with mayors, with councils, with chiefs of police, also with public health and planners and transportation, anybody who cares about cities and people, because this bi-weekly webinar, Cities for Everyone, is about helping people strengthen their tools on becoming passionate advocates. Thank you very much, and see you 2 weeks from today.